Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you're joining me today, chances are you are intimately familiar with the sheer exhaustion of repeating yourself to a child who seems, well, completely tuned out. So today, we're going to explore a deeply effective and honestly, a much calmer way to communicate with our kids, drawing on some really incredible insights from Japanese parenting culture. Our goal here isn't to force compliance. It's actually to align our communication with how a developing brain really processes information. So, let's get right into it.
15. That's probably the number of times you've asked your child to just put their shoes on today, right? Look, I want to start by validating exactly how frustrating and honestly how draining that dynamic is. As caregivers, we just naturally assume that if a child doesn't listen the first time, we just need to say it again and maybe, a little bit louder. But here's the thing. From a developmental standpoint, this repetition is actually creating the exact problem we're trying so desperately to solve.
In child development, we call this dynamic the repetition trap.
Here is absolutely the most important thing you need to hear today. Your child isn't deaf, and they're really not being deliberately defiant. It's just that every single time you give an instruction without following through, your child's developing brain accidentally files it away under not important yet. So that first put your shoes on, it just registers as a mild suggestion. The 10th? Well, that's their cue that the real instruction is finally coming. Obviously, we don't teach this intentionally, but every repeated instruction accidentally sends the message, hey, you don't actually have to act until the adult gets angry.
And that brings us to a beautifully simple alternative. You see, Japanese parents generally follow a rule that completely rewires how a child's brain receives an instruction, basically entirely eliminating the need to raise your voice. The paradigm is simple. Say it once. Now, this isn't because Japanese kids are just inherently more obedient or anything like that. It's because their parents utilize 3 very specific, quiet techniques that prevent an instruction from ever becoming just background noise.
So, let's look at technique 1, connection before direction.
This first technique completely solves that age-old problem of shouting commands across a busy playground or yelling from the kitchen into the living room. The Japanese call this mi o miru, which essentially translates to meet the eyes. A Japanese parent rarely gives an instruction to the back of a child's head. Instead, they physically approach them. They stop, walk over, crouch down to eye level, and then they simply wait. They don't say a single word until the child actually makes eye contact. Sure, it takes maybe 10 extra seconds, but it completely replaces those 15 exhausting repetitions.
As a child development expert, I can tell you this just brilliantly illustrates how kids' brains work. You see, a young, developing brain literally cannot fully process a highly engaging activity, like, say, stacking blocks, and a verbal command at the exact same time. When you shout from another room, your words are landing on a child who is physically present, sure, but mentally, they're a million miles away in their own little world. Eye contact acts as this vital neurological attention switch. It manually moves their cognitive focus away from those blocks and directly onto you.
Moving right along to technique 2, managing cognitive load.
Okay, so once we actually have their undivided attention, we use a concept called hitotsu dake, which means only one. Basically, you give a single instruction instead of this rapid-fire sequence of commands. Doing this completely prevents the cognitive overload that happens when a child's working memory is just bombarded with information, way faster than it can actually process and retain it.
I want you to consider the stark contrast here. In the West, we so often use this stacked approach, right? We fire off 4 or 5 steps at once. Get your shoes, grab your bag, get your water bottle. To an adult brain, that's just one simple sequence. But to a child, it's an absolute avalanche. Kids aren't failing to listen here out of defiance. They fail because literally no young child has the working memory capacity to hold 4 separate commands in their head at once. The Japanese approach just breaks it down. Put your shoes on. You wait for that to happen. And then, okay, now get your bag.
I know, giving just one command, waiting for it to be finished, and then calmly giving the next one, it can feel agonizingly slow to our fast-paced adult minds. But in reality, it's incredibly fast, and it is just so much less stressful. At the end of the day, one clear instruction that successfully gets done is always going to beat 4 stacked instructions that inevitably get ignored, forgotten, or just end in a massive argument.
And that brings us to technique 3, the power of silence. I have to warn you, this technique is, without a doubt, the absolute hardest one to master. But I promise you it is the most powerful tool in this entire calming approach. It's known as mate kara, which simply means after waiting. Here's how it works. You say your instruction exactly once, you close your mouth, and you literally let the silence do the heavy lifting. You crouch down, you make eye contact, you say, please put your shoes on, and then you just wait.
Now, I know exactly what's going to happen. Every frantic instinct in your body is going to want to jump in and fill that uncomfortable gap with a second reminder, just to make absolutely sure they heard you. But listen to me on this. The very moment you repeat yourself, you teach your child that the first time didn't count. The silence right after the instruction is where the neural pathways for active listening are actually being built. It signals to your child's brain that the instruction is complete and hey, there isn't a louder, angrier version coming down the pike.
Let's quickly talk about building the habit.
What I absolutely love most about these methods is realizing that not a single one of these techniques requires punitive measures or yelling or suddenly transforming into this super strict parent. They really just require you to take a breath and become a calmer, clearer presence. When you put it all together, your physical response just completely transforms into this incredibly gentle four-step process. You walk over to where they are, you crouch down to their level, you wait patiently for their eyes, you speak your one instruction clearly just once, and then you just hold that quiet space.
Now please give yourself and your child a whole lot of grace here. Unlearning deeply ingrained habits takes time. The first few times you try this, it's going to feel pretty strange. I mean, your child has probably spent months or maybe even years learning to wait for your 15th angry repetition, so they might just stare at you, literally waiting for you to get loud. It takes a little time to unlearn that dynamic, but I've found that usually within just a week of consistency, they realize that first time is the real deal, and they'll actually get moving.
Look, making a massive shift in how we parent is hard work, so I want to offer you a totally manageable 7-day challenge. Please don't try to change everything all at once. This week, I just want you to try the very first step. Before every instruction you give, just walk over, crouch down, and wait for their eyes before you open your mouth to speak. Just try that one single shift in connection for 7 days and just watch what happens to the overall energy in your home. I really encourage you to try this approach with your child tomorrow morning. Be incredibly patient with yourself, and of course, be patient with their developing brains. As you work to transform all that daily chaos into genuine cooperation, I want to leave you with one final question to really chew on. What happens when you finally stop shouting and you just trust the quiet?